The silence in the hallway of the Hilton was deafening, broken only by the muffled thump of a bass line from the ballroom. I stood there, 72 years of life weighing on my bones, holding a small velvet box containing the diamond earrings I'd spent 6 months' pension on. They were meant for my daughter, Chloe, on her wedding day. My hand was inches from the heavy oak door of the bridal suite when I heard it, the sharp, unmistakable trill of her laughter, followed by the low, grumbling tone of my son, Brandon. "Look, I already checked the joint account," Brandon said, his voice dripping with a callousness I didn't recognize. "The old girl moved another 20 grand in this morning. That covers the open bar and the extra catering. We're golden." "Thank God," Chloe exhaled, and I could practically see her checking her reflection, indifferent to the cost. I was worried she was going to get tight-fisted since we didn't put her at the head table. But honestly, Brandon, it's easier this way. If she's sitting in the back, she won't be in any of the primary photos. I don't want the grandma aesthetic ruining the vibe of the professional shots. She's basically just a walking checkbook at this point anyway. The velvet box felt like it weighed 100 pounds. My heart didn't just break, it hardened like clay in a kiln. For 40 years, I had been the giver. I had paid for college tuitions, down payments on houses, and emergency car repairs that were actually just upgrades. I had lived in a small, drafty bungalow so they could live in gated communities. I had been their safety net, their cook, their nanny, and their silent partner. "Do you think she'll notice the invitation for the post-wedding brunch was lost in the mail?" Chloe asked, giggling. "Please," Brandon scoffed. "As long as we tell her she looks pretty and ask for a loan for my new SUV next week, she'll be too busy smiling to notice she's being sidelined. She's a pushover, Chloe. Always has been, always will be. We just keep the ATM fed with a little fake affection, and the money keeps flowing." I didn't open the door, I didn't cry. I turned around, my sensible heels clicking softly on the plush carpet, and walked toward the elevator. The walking checkbook was about to close its accounts for good. As the elevator doors slid shut, I took out my phone and dialed my bank's emergency line. I had a wedding to cancel, or at least, a wedding I was no longer sponsoring. The elevator reached the lobby, and as I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I felt a strange, cold clarity. I wasn't going to the ballroom. I was going to the parking garage. But as I reached for my keys, a hand gripped my shoulder, spinning me around. It was Brandon, his face flushed with irritation. "Mom, what are you doing out here? The ceremony starts in 10 minutes. And did you bring that check for the photographer?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see my baby. I saw a predator. Brandon's eyes narrowed as he realized I wasn't carrying my purse, and his grip on my arm tightened just a fraction too much. "Mom, where is the money?" "The money is exactly where it belongs, Brandon," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. I reached up and calmly removed his hand from my arm. It was the first time I had ever resisted him, and the look of pure shock on his face would have been comical if it wasn't so tragic. "What is that supposed to mean?" he hissed, glancing around the lobby to see if any of the wedding guests were watching. "The photographer is literally waiting by the booth. He needs the balance in cash or a cashier's check. You said you had it." "I lied," I said. The word felt delicious on my tongue. "Just like you lied about the head table. Just like Chloe lied about the brunch invitation. I heard you, Brandon. I heard everything through the suite door." The blood drained from his face, replaced quickly by a dark, ugly blotchiness. The sweet son who used to send me Mother's Day cards vanished, replaced by the man who saw me as a financial obstacle. "You were eavesdropping. That's low, Mom, even for you. You're sensitive, okay? You're taking things out of context. We were joking, it's wedding stress." "It wasn't a joke when you checked my private bank balance," I countered. "It wasn't a joke when you decided I would ruin the aesthetic of the photos. I'm going home now. And just so we're clear, the transfer I made this morning, I've already initiated a reversal. By the time the bank opens on Monday, that money will be back in my personal savings, not the joint account you so graciously helped me manage." Brandon's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. That's Chloe's wedding fund. You're going to ruin her life. People are already sitting down. If the vendors don't get paid, they'll shut this whole thing down." "Then I suggest you and your sister find a way to finance your own vibe," I told him. I turned to walk toward my car, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "You're not going anywhere," he growled, his voice low and threatening. "You're clearly having some kind of episode. Maybe it's the new medication the doctor put you on. You're confused, Mom. You're not acting like yourself. If you leave now, you're proving you can't handle your own affairs. Is that what you want? For us to have to step in legally?" The threat was veiled, but the sting was sharp. He was already planting the seeds of mental instability to keep his grip on my throat. "Step aside, Brandon," I warned. "No," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Chloe. When she hears you're trying to sabotage her big day because you misunderstood a conversation, she's going to be devastated. You want to be the villain. Fine, but don't think we'll just let you walk away with our inheritance because you're having a tantrum." Before I could respond, the lobby doors swung open and Chloe stood there in her white lace gown, her face a mask of fury rather than bridal joy. She wasn't looking for a hug. She was clutching a legal-looking document her maid of honor had just handed her. Chloe didn't care that her train was dragging across the dusty floor of the parking garage entrance. She marched toward me, the delicate lace of her sleeve trembling. "Brandon just texted me. Mom, what are you doing? Tell me you didn't actually touch the wedding account." "I didn't touch it, Chloe," I said calmly. "I reclaimed it." "There's a difference." "You're being manic," Chloe shouted, and I noticed a few guests peeking out from the hotel bar. "This is exactly what we were talking about last month. You're getting forgetful, you're getting paranoid. We were trying to protect you by staying close to your finances, and now you're doing this. On my wedding day." The gaslighting was so seamless it almost made me dizzy. If I hadn't heard them in that room, I might have believed them. I might have apologized and handed over the check, desperate to prove I was still sane and loving. But the veil had been lifted. "I'm not manic, Chloe, I'm awake," I said. "And as for protecting me, we both know you were protecting your lifestyle. I've spent 40 years making sure you two never had to want for anything. I thought I was building a family. I realize now I was just building a payroll." "You owe us," Brandon interjected, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "Dad left that money for all of us, not just for you to hoard in your old age while we struggle." "Your father left that money to ensure I was taken care of," I snapped back, my voice rising. "And I have used it to give you everything. But the Bank of Grandma is closed, effective immediately. I'm going to my car, I'm going home, and I'm changing my locks." Chloe's face twisted into something truly demonic. The princess was gone. "If you walk away now, Mom, don't bother calling, you won't see the grandkids. You won't be at Christmas. You'll be all alone in that house until the state has to come take you away because you've lost your mind. Is that what you want, to die alone?" It was the ultimate weapon, the grandchildren. My heart winced at the thought of little Leo and Sarah, but I knew if I stayed, I was teaching them that love is something you trade for a paycheck. If the price of seeing my grandchildren is my dignity and my livelihood, then you've already taken them from me, I said, my heart leaden. I pushed past them. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my sedan, but I didn't let them see. I got inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I backed out, I saw Brandon shouting into his phone and Chloe screaming at a hotel manager who had come out to see what the commotion was. I drove away from the Hilton, away from the flowers and the $150 a plate dinners. I felt a strange sense of mourning, but also a spark of something else. Freedom. However, as I pulled onto the main highway, my dashboard lit up with a notification. My smart home app was pinging me. Someone was currently at my front door, and they weren't using a key. They were using a crowbar. I looked at the grainy black and white footage on my phone screen. It wasn't a burglar. It was Brandon's wife, Sarah, and she was carrying empty cardboard boxes into my house. My blood ran cold. They hadn't even waited for the wedding to end. They knew I'd be at the hotel all night, and they had planned to downsize me while I was watching Chloe dance. The level of premeditation was staggering. They weren't just after the cash. They were after the house. I pulled over to the shoulder of the road, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had two choices. I could go home and confront her, or I could do this the right way. I remembered the face of my old friend Martha, who had gone through something similar 3 years ago. "Document everything, Evelyn," she had told me over tea. "Because when the wolves realize the shepherd is gone, they don't just leave. They try to eat the sheep." I didn't head home. Instead, I drove 3 blocks down to the local precinct. I knew Sergeant Miller. I taught his kids in Sunday school 20 years ago. Evelyn, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the Hilton? Miller asked, looking up from his desk with a confused smile. There's been a change of plans, Joe, I said, leaning on the counter to steady myself. I need to report a breaking and entering at my home. Right now. I showed him the footage on my phone. His expression shifted from confusion to professional sternness. Is that your daughter-in-law? Do they have a key? No, and they don't have permission to be there, I said. They're moving my things out, Joe. They're trying to force me out of my own life. Stay here, Miller said, grabbing his cap. I'll send a cruiser over. You shouldn't be there alone if things are escalating. While the police headed to my house, I sat in the plastic chair of the waiting room and did something I should have done a decade ago. I logged into my laptop and began moving every cent of my remaining liquid assets into a new, solo account at a completely different bank, one where Brandon didn't have a legacy connection from his childhood savings account. Then I called a locksmith. An hour later, Sergeant Miller called me. Evelyn, we've cleared the premises. Your daughter-in-law claimed she was helping you pack for your move to the assisted living facility. She seemed surprised that you hadn't authorized it. We've told her to leave, but she's made a lot of noise about your mental state, Evelyn. She told the officers you've been delusional lately. I'm sure she did, I whispered. Thank you, Joe. I drove home under the cover of darkness. My front door was slightly splintered near the frame, but the police had stayed until the locksmith arrived. As I walked through my living room, seeing the half-packed boxes of my memories, my grandmother's china, my late husband's journals, I felt a rage so pure it burned away the last of my grief. They thought I was a frail old woman they could scare into a corner. They thought because I was kind, I was weak. I sat down at my desk and opened my treasure ledger, a detailed book I'd kept for 40 years of every loan, every gift, and every bill I'd paid for them, complete with receipts and bank statements. I had the paper trail of their greed, and I was going to use it to build a cage. Just as I picked up my pen to start a list of legal contacts, a heavy knock sounded at the door. Not the police, not a locksmith. It was a man in a suit I didn't recognize, holding a manila envelope. Evelyn Vance, you've been served. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship. The paper felt like ice in my hands. I stared at the bold lettering. Petition for involuntary guardianship and CONSERVATORSHIP. Brandon and Chloe hadn't just gotten angry, they had gone nuclear. They were claiming that my sudden erratic behavior at the wedding, combined with recent episodes of paranoia and financial mismanagement, made me a danger to myself. The man in the suit didn't linger. He disappeared into the night, leaving me standing in my foyer surrounded by the boxes my daughter-in-law had intended to fill with my life. I looked at the hearing date. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. They were moving at light speed, hoping to catch me off guard over the weekend while the courts were mostly closed, and I was confused. They wanted a judge to freeze my assets and hand the keys to Brandon before I could even find a lawyer. You think I'm a victim, I whispered to the empty room, but you forgot who taught you how to fight. I didn't go to bed. I spent the night at my kitchen table, the treasure ledger open. I scanned every check Brandon had ever borrowed for his failed tech startups. I pulled the emails from Chloe begging for just $5,000 more for her designer handbags while claiming she couldn't afford her rent. I gathered the medical records from my last checkup, 3 weeks ago, where my doctor had noted I was in excellent physical and cognitive health for my age. I was the one who had managed the family estate after my husband passed. I was the one who had balanced the books when the kids were too busy spending to realize we were in a recession. I wasn't just a grandma, I was a retired CPA, and they had clearly forgotten that. By Saturday morning, I wasn't just a woman under attack, I was a woman with a plan. I called my oldest friend, Clara, whose son was a high-powered estate attorney. Evelyn, honey, I heard about the wedding, Clara said, her voice full of pity. The gossip is already all over town. Brandon is telling everyone you had a breakdown in the lobby. Let him talk, Clara, I said, my voice cold and sharp. I need your son. I need the meanest, most meticulous legal mind in the state, and I need him to meet me in an hour. We're going to give Brandon and Chloe the financial management they've been looking for. The weekend was a blur of coffee, spreadsheets, and legal strategy. I didn't answer the dozens of frantic, screaming texts from my children. I didn't pick up when Chloe tried to use Leo's voice on a voicemail to get me to come to my senses. I stayed focused. Monday morning arrived, gray and rainy. I dressed in my best charcoal suit, the one I used to wear to board meetings. I did my hair, put on my pearls, and applied a layer of red lipstick that felt like war paint. When I walked into the courthouse, I saw them. Brandon, Chloe, and Sarah were huddled together with a public defender, looking like a united front of concerned family members. When they saw me, Chloe put on a fake, trembling smile. "Mom," she said, stepping forward with crocodile tears in her eyes. "We're so glad you're here. We just want to get you the help you need. Just sign the papers, and we can go home and talk about this like a family." I looked at her, then at the judge who was calling the court to order. "I'm not here to talk, Chloe," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I'm here to audit." The judge looked down at me, then at the thick binder in my hand. "Mrs. Vance, your children have filed an emergency petition claiming you are no longer capable of managing your estate. Do you have legal representation?" I looked at the door as Clara's son walked in, followed by two assistants carrying boxes of my records. "I do, Your Honor. And I also have a counterclaim for the immediate repayment of $300,000 in outstanding personal loans." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. I watched as Brandon's face went from a smug mask of concern to a pale, sickly shade of gray. Chloe, ever the actress, let out a small, theatrical gasp, clutching her pearls. "Loans? Mom, what are you talking about? Those were gifts. You said you wanted to help us." "The law and my signed promissory notes say otherwise, Chloe," I replied, not breaking eye contact. My attorney, Marcus, stepped forward, placing the first of several thick binders on the table. The thud it made seemed to echo through the judge's chambers. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice smooth and authoritative, "we are here today not because Mrs. Vance is confused, but because she has decided to stop subsidizing the lavish lifestyles of two adults who have mistaken her kindness for a lack of memory. We have here a decade's worth of documentation. We have emails where the petitioners explicitly refer to these funds as short-term loans to be repaid upon the sale of properties or the maturity of investments, events that have long since passed without a single cent being returned." The judge, a formidable woman named Judge Halloway, leaned forward, peering over her spectacles. "Mr. Vance, Ms. Vance, your petition claims your mother is suffering from severe cognitive decline and delusional financial paranoia. And yet, she seems to have arrived with a more organized financial record than most of the corporations that come through this court." "It's a symptom," Brandon shouted, his voice cracking. "She's hyperfixated. She spent all weekend obsessing over numbers that don't matter because she's trying to punish us for her own mental break at the wedding. She's trying to ruin us because she's lonely and bitter." "Silence, Mr. Vance," the judge snapped. "This is a courtroom, not a reality show." I felt a surge of adrenaline. For years, I had stayed quiet to keep the peace, afraid that if I stopped the flow of money, I would lose the people I loved. But looking at them now, I realized I had already lost them years ago to their own greed. I wasn't losing a family, I was losing a set of leeches. Marcus handed a document to the court clerk. "Your Honor, we also have the results of a cognitive evaluation Mrs. Vance underwent voluntarily on Saturday morning with a board-certified neurologist. She scored a perfect 30 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. She is, quite literally, more mentally fit than the people trying to seize her bank accounts." Chloe began to sob, real tears this time but born of fear, not regret. "Mom, please, we just wanted you to be safe, we thought. We thought you were changing." "I am changing, Chloe," I said, my voice cold and clear. "I'm becoming the woman I was before I let you two turn me into an ATM." The judge looked at the binders, then at my children. "Based on this evidence, I am inclined to dismiss this petition immediately. However," she paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked at a specific page Marcus had highlighted, "there is the matter of the unauthorized access to Mrs. Vance's primary savings account reported late Friday night. Mr. Vance, would you care to explain why you attempted to wire $40,000 to an offshore account while your mother was at the police station?" The air in the room seemed to vanish. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He turned to his sister, But Chloe was already backing away, physically distancing herself from him as if his legal trouble were contagious. I. I was protecting the assets. Brandon stammered. I knew she was going to do something crazy, and I wanted to make sure the money for the kids' college funds was safe. It wasn't for me, I swear. The offshore account is registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called B Ventures, Marcus interjected, reading from a tablet. Which, according to our research over the weekend, is a company Brandon Vance uses to fund his high-stakes online gambling habit. It has nothing to do with college funds. The judge's face hardened into a mask of pure iron. Mr. Vance, you have not only filed a frivolous and bad faith petition for guardianship, but you have also admitted to an attempted theft of assets from a woman you claimed was incapacitated. That is a felony. I felt a moment of pity, the ghost of the mother I used to be, but I suppressed it. If the roles were reversed, Brandon would have left me with nothing but a suitcase and a bed in the cheapest nursing home he could find. Your Honor, I said, standing up, I do not wish to press charges against my son today, not yet. Brandon let out a breath of relief, but I wasn't done. However, I continued, I am requesting a permanent restraining order. I am also requesting that the court oversee the immediate liquidation of the properties. My children live in properties that are currently held in a trust that I control. Since they believe I am too unfit to manage their homes, I think it's best if I sell them and move the capital into my own retirement fund. The screams that followed were deafening. Chloe fell to her knees begging, while Brandon's aggressive side finally broke through. He lunged toward the table, screaming that I couldn't do this, that he would make me regret the day I was born. Bailiffs moved in instantly, pinning him to the floor. As they dragged my son out of the courtroom in handcuffs for contempt, Chloe looked at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. You've destroyed us, Mom. You really did it. You're going to be so alone. No one is ever going to love you again. Chloe, I said, leaning down so only she could hear me. The difference is that now, I won't have to pay people to pretend they do. I walked out of that courtroom a free woman, but as I reached the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of my house, my beautiful, quiet bungalow, and there was a moving truck backed up to the front door that I hadn't authorized. The text read, You think the court can protect everything? We're taking what's ours before the locks are changed again. Good luck finding the elder's treasure now. My heart hammered against my ribs. The elder's treasure. It was a family joke, or so I thought. My late husband, Arthur, had always teased the kids that he had hidden a treasure in the house for me, something to ensure I'd never be lonely or poor if he passed first. I always thought he meant the life insurance or the house itself, but Brandon and Chloe had always been obsessed with the idea of a hidden wall safe full of gold or untraceable cash. I didn't call the police this time. I called the private security firm Marcus had recommended. Get to my address now, I barked. Use whatever force is necessary to secure the perimeter. I drove like a woman possessed. When I turned onto my street, my heart sank. It was a circus. Neighbors were peeking through their curtains as a group of men, hired hands, likely were hauling my heavy antique desk out onto the lawn. Sarah, Brandon's wife, was standing on the porch like a general barking orders. Stop. I screamed, slamming my car into park and leaping out. This is my home, you are trespassing. Sarah turned, a cold, mocking smile on her face. Oh, Evelyn, the confused act won't work here, Brandon called. He said the judge was undecided, but that we needed to secure the family heirlooms before you donated them to some charity in your mania. We're just looking for Dad's legacy. There is no gold in this house, Sarah. I shouted, marching up the driveway. We'll see about that, she sneered. We found the floorboard in the library, the one Arthur always talked about. We're about to pry it up. The library, my heart stopped. That room was Arthur's sanctuary. It wasn't just about money, it was the only place I still felt his presence. The thought of them ripping up the floorboards, desecrating his memory for a payday that didn't exist, made me see red. I tried to push past her, but Sarah blocked the door. She was younger and stronger, and she shoved me back with a sneer. Go sit in the car, Evelyn, before you trip and give us more evidence for the next hearing. Just then, the security SUV screeched to a halt behind my car. Two large men in tactical gear stepped out, but before they could reach the porch, A loud crack echoed from inside the house. A muffled shout of triumph came from the library. "I found it! Sarah, get in here, it's a box, a heavy one." Sarah grinned and vanished inside, slamming the door and locking it. I stood on my own lawn, barred from my own home, as the sound of metal hitting wood continued. But then the shouting stopped. It was replaced by a high-pitched, terrifying scream of frustration. "What is this? This can't be it." The scream came from Chloe. She must have slipped in through the back door while I was at court. I didn't wait for the security team to find a way in. I remembered the spare key I'd hidden inside a fake plastic rock in the garden 15 years ago, a secret only Arthur and I knew. I scrambled through the hydrangeas, grabbed the key, and ran to the side mudroom door. It turned with a click. I burst into the library just as Chloe and Sarah were staring at an open iron box on the floor. The treasure wasn't gold. It wasn't cash. The box was filled with hundreds of envelopes. Each one was dated. Each one was addressed to me, and on top of the pile was a single, leather-bound ledger that looked exactly like the one I had been keeping. "It's just paper." Chloe shrieked, kicking the box. "He promised a legacy. He told us he was leaving us the elder's treasure. Where is the money? Where is the offshore account info?" I walked over and picked up the ledger. My hands were trembling. I opened the first page. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a confession. To my dearest Evelyn, the writing began in Arthur's familiar, loopy script. "If our children are reading this, it means I have failed. It means they have come looking for gold instead of wisdom. This ledger contains the truth of every sacrifice you made that they never saw. It contains the records of the debts I covered for them in secret, so you wouldn't worry. But most importantly, it contains the evidence they need to see who they've become." I looked up at Chloe and Sarah. They weren't even listening. They were busy ripping the linings out of Arthur's old armchairs, convinced the real money was hidden in the upholstery. "You're looking for the wrong thing," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Shut up, Mom." Chloe snapped, her face distorted with greed. "We know he was worth millions. He didn't just spend it all on us. There has to be a hidden account." "He didn't spend it all on you," I said, a sudden realization dawning on me as I flipped to the back of the ledger. "He put it into a blind trust, one that only triggers under a very specific condition." Both women froze. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead. "What condition?" I read the final page, and a cold smile spread across my face. Arthur had known. Even back then, he had seen the seeds of their entitlement. He had built a final test. "The condition," I said, holding the ledger tight, "is that if the children ever attempted to legally declare me unfit or attempted to forcibly remove me from this home, the entire estate, every stock, every bond, and the deed to every property they currently live in, immediately transfers to a charitable foundation for the elderly." Chloe's eyes went wide. She lunged for the ledger, but I stepped back, and the security team finally burst through the front door. "You're lying," she screamed. "He wouldn't do that to us." "He didn't do it to you, Chloe," I said. "You did it to yourselves. And the best part, I'm the only one who has the password to stop the transfer, and the clock just started ticking." The library was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the two women who had just realized they had gambled away their entire futures. The security guards stood like statues at the door, their presence making the room feel small and cramped. "What do you mean, a clock?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, let's be reasonable. We were emotional. We thought you were being manipulated by someone else. We were trying to save the family assets." "The clock is the 3-day grace period Arthur built into the trust," I said, looking at the ledger. "It's a cooling-off clause. If I don't log into the estate portal and verify that this was a misunderstanding by Wednesday at noon, the transfer becomes irrevocable. All those houses you're living in, they'll belong to the Sunset Grace Foundation by Thursday morning. You'll be tenants of a nonprofit, and I doubt they'll be as forgiving about missed rent as I was." Chloe began to hyperventilate. "Mom, you can't. My kids, your grandkids, where will they go? You're going to make your own grandchildren homeless." The guilt trip was an old song, one I'd danced to 1,000 times, but the music had stopped. "Your children have a mother and a father who are perfectly capable of working. Perhaps if you spent less time auditing my bank account and more time looking at a job board, you wouldn't have to worry about the roof over their heads." "We'll fight it," Brandon's voice boomed from the hallway. He had been released on bail, likely using the last of his emergency cash. He strode into the library, his face bruised and his ego shattered. That trust won't hold up in court. It's a spiteful document. It's a legally binding contract, Brandon, I said. And since you already tried to prove I was confused and failed, you've actually validated the trust's trigger. By claiming I was unfit, you officially started the countdown. Brandon looked at the iron box, then at me. I saw the gears turning. He was trying to figure out if he could overpower me and take the ledger. But with 2 armed security guards behind me, he knew he was trapped. "What do you want?" he hissed. "You didn't just tell us this to gloat, you want something." "I want exactly what I've always wanted," I said. "I want to be left alone. But since I can't trust you to do that, I have a new set of terms. If you want me to stop that transfer, you're going to sign a confession. You're going to admit to the attempted fraud, the breaking and entering, and you're going to sign a document renouncing any future claim to my estate." "You're disinheriting us," Chloe sobbed. "No," I said, a sharp glint in my eye. "I'm liberating you. You've spent your lives waiting for me to die so you could start living. I'm giving you the gift of starting now, without my money." Brandon took a step forward, his eyes burning with a dark, desperate light. "And if we don't sign? If we just stay here and refuse to leave your house?" I pulled a small remote from my pocket, the one for the new high-decibel alarm system the locksmith had installed while they were busy in the library. "Then the police come back, and this time I won't ask them not to press charges." The standoff in the library felt like it lasted a century. Brandon stared at the alarm remote in my hand, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. He was a man who had always gotten his way through volume and intimidation, but he was realizing that those tools were useless against a woman who had nothing left to lose. "You're bluffing," Brandon whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. "You love those kids too much to put us in jail." "I do love them," I said, my voice as cold as a mountain stream. "Which is why I'm not going to let them grow up watching their father bully an old woman for her pension. Sign the papers, Brandon, or don't. Either way, the locks are being changed again in 20 minutes, and this time, the security guards stay on the porch." Sarah was the first to break. She grabbed a pen from the desk, her hand shaking. "I'll sign. I'm not going to prison because you two can't keep your greed in check. Brandon, sign it. We can still save the house if she stops the transfer." One by one, they signed the documents Marcus had prepared, the confessions, the renunciations, the promises to stay away. It was a funeral for the family I thought I had, but as I watched them scrawl their names, I felt a weight lifting off my chest that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "There," Chloe spat, throwing the pen at my feet. "You have your confession, now stop the transfer, give us our lives back." "I will stop the transfer to the foundation," I said, picking up the pen. "But I never said the houses would stay in your names. I'm moving the titles into a restricted trust for my grandchildren's education. You can live there, but you will pay market-rate rent to that trust. And if you're a day late, the trust evicts you." The look of pure, unadulterated shock on their faces was the most satisfying thing I had ever seen. They had wanted the Elder S treasure, and I had given it to them. It was the treasure of accountability. They shuffled out of the house like defeated soldiers, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my library. I sat down in Arthur's old chair, clutching the ledger to my chest. I had won. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a bone-deep exhaustion took its place. I closed my eyes for a moment, but a sudden, sharp thud from the basement made them snap back open. My house was supposed to be empty. I looked at the security monitors. The guards were still at the front and back doors, but the basement sensor was flashing red. Someone hadn't left. Someone was still in the house, and they were heading for the fuse box. The lights flickered once, then twice, before the house plunged into a thick, suffocating darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for the alarm remote, but the silent system required power to communicate with the central station. "Evelyn," a voice hissed from the shadows of the hallway. It wasn't Brandon. It wasn't Chloe. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, low, gravelly, and full of a familiar, oily charm. "Uncle Silas," I whispered, my blood turning to ice. Silas was Arthur's brother, a man who had been banished from the family circle decades ago for embezzlement. He was the one who had taught Brandon everything he knew about investing other people's money. I thought he was still in Florida, or perhaps in a federal prison. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, blinding me. Behind the light, the silhouette of a thin, hawk-like man stepped into the library. I heard there was a treasure hunt going on, Silas said, his teeth glinting in the reflected light. And I knew my nephews were too stupid to find the real prize. Arthur was always a sentimental fool, but he wasn't a liar. The children are gone, Silas, I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. The police have been here. Security is outside. The security guards are currently occupied with a very expensive distraction. I parked at the end of the driveway, Silas chuckled. And as for the police, they think the drama is over. But you and I know Arthur better than that, don't we? He didn't put the treasure in a ledger. That was just the decoy for the kids. He walked toward the fireplace, his flashlight scanning the intricate stonework. Arthur used to talk about the cornerstone of the family. He was a literalist, Evelyn, always was. I realized then that Silas didn't know about the legal battle or the trust. He was a ghost from the past, hunting for a myth. But as he began to pry at a specific stone near the hearth, I remembered something Arthur had told me on our wedding anniversary. If the house ever burns, Evelyn, take the stone with the bird carving. It's the only thing that matters. I had always thought he meant the carving was beautiful. Get away from there, I said, stepping forward. Silas turned, the flashlight beam hitting my face again. Or what? You'll call your children. They hate you. You'll call the guards. They're busy. Just sit tight, Evelyn. I take the loot, I disappear, and you can go back to your lonely little life. He shoved a crowbar into the seam of the stone. With a groan of protesting mortar, the heavy block shifted. Silas reached into the dark cavity behind the stone, his face twisted in greed. But as his hand closed around whatever was inside, his expression shifted from triumph to sheer terror. What? What is this? Evelyn, what did he do? Silas pulled his hand back, as if he'd been bitten. He wasn't holding a bag of gold or a box of cash. He was holding a small, metallic cylinder with a digital display that was glowing a faint, ominous red. It's a GPS-linked security canister, I said, the memory of Arthur's hobby in high-end security systems suddenly clicking into place. He told me once that if anyone ever forced their way into the cornerstone, it would trigger a silent alert to a private vault firm. I don't care about alerts, Silas roared, reaching back in. He pulled out a thick stack of what looked like bearer bonds, untraceable, high-value documents that were as good as cash. His eyes lit up. This is it. This is millions, Evelyn, millions. It's theft, Silas, I said, my voice gaining strength. Those are part of the estate. They belong in the trust. They belong to whoever can cash them. Silas barked. He stuffed the bonds into a canvas bag, but as he turned to flee through the mudroom, I realized I couldn't let him leave. If those bonds disappeared, the treasure for my grandchildren's future disappeared with them. I didn't have the strength to fight him, but I had the layout of the house. I knew that the mudroom door had a heavy, old-fashioned deadbolt that could only be opened with a key from the inside, a safety feature Arthur had installed because of Silas's past break-ins. I lunged for the mudroom door just as Silas reached it. I slammed the door shut and twisted the key, pulling it from the lock and throwing it into the darkness of the kitchen. You old fool. Silas screamed, dropping the bag and lunging for me. He grabbed my shoulders, shaking me. Where's the key? Give it to me. It's gone, Silas, I said, gasping for air. And the guards will be back any second. You're trapped. Silas looked like a cornered animal. He looked at the window, but it was too small for him to squeeze through. He looked back at me, his face contorting with rage. He raised his hand, and for a second I thought he was going to strike me. Suddenly, the front door burst open. I expected the security guards, but instead I heard a familiar, panicked voice. Mom, are you in there? The guards said someone tripped the perimeter. It was Brandon. He had come back. Silas froze, using me as a shield as Brandon stepped into the kitchen with a heavy flashlight. The beam landed on us and Brandon gasped. Uncle Silas, what the hell are you doing here? Quiet boy, Silas hissed. I've got the bonds. Help me get this door open, and we'll split them. We can leave your mother here and be in Mexico by morning. The kitchen was silent, the only sound the heavy thumping of my own heart. I looked at my son. This was the moment of truth. He had spent years treating me like a resource to be tapped, a bank to be robbed. Now, his mentor, the man who had poisoned his mind with greed, was offering him the ultimate payout. All he had to do was step over his mother to get it. Brandon, I whispered, my voice cracking. Don't do this. Shut up, Evelyn. Silas snapped, tightening his grip on my arm. Look at the bag, Brandon. There's enough in there to pay off your debts, buy that SUV you want, and never have to listen to this woman's lectures again. Just find the key. Brandon's flashlight beam shook. He looked at the canvas bag on the floor, the corner of a high-value bond peeking out. I saw the hunger in his eyes, the same hunger I'd seen at the wedding. He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the money. Where's the key, Mom? Brandon asked, his voice low and strange. I threw it, I said, tears finally pricking my eyes. I threw it because I wanted to see if there was anything left of the boy I raised. Is there, Brandon? Or are you just like him? Brandon reached into the shadows of the kitchen floor, his hand searching near the base of the refrigerator. Silas grinned, a predator watching its cub. That's it, boy, find it and we're gone. Brandon's hand closed around something metallic. He stood up, the silver key glinting in the flashlight's beam. Silas reached out for it, his eyes wide with greed. But Brandon didn't hand him the key. Instead, Brandon looked at Silas, then looked at the bruises forming on my arm where Silas was clutching me. Suddenly, Brandon's face shifted. The greed didn't vanish, but it was overtaken by a sudden, violent surge of protective rage. You're hurting her, Brandon said, his voice dropping an octave. Who cares? Silas laughed. She's an old woman. She's lived her life. This is our time. She's my mother, Brandon said. In one swift motion, Brandon didn't use the key on the door. He lunged forward and tackled Silas, slamming the older man into the mudroom wall. The bag of bonds fell, spilling across the linoleum. As they wrestled on the floor, the back door suddenly shattered. A swarm of black-clad security guards burst in, their weapons drawn. But in the chaos, Silas managed to grab a heavy— Brandon, look out, I screamed. The jar shattered against the wall just inches from Brandon's temple as he rolled away. The security guards didn't hesitate. Within seconds, Silas was pinned to the floor, his face pressed against the cold linoleum, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Brandon sat on the floor, panting, his shirt torn and his face scratched. He didn't look like a hero, he looked like a man who had just barely survived himself. The guards cleared the house, the bright beam of their professional lanterns finally chasing away the shadows. One of the guards helped me to a chair, while another collected the spilled bearer bonds and put them back into the canvas bag. Are you all right, ma'am? The guard asked. I'm fine, I whispered, though my heart was still racing. I looked at Brandon. He was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. The police are on their way, the guard continued. We've already called it in. This one, he gestured to Silas, is going away for a long time. Silas spat on the floor, his eyes full of venom. You're a fool, Brandon. You could have had it all. Now you have nothing. She's still going to make you pay rent. She's still going to control you. Take him out, I said firmly. As they dragged Silas away, the kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence. Brandon slowly stood up, brushing the dust from his knees. He looked at the bag of bonds, then at me. I didn't do it for the money, he said, his voice barely audible. I mean, I wanted to. For a second I really wanted to. I know, I said, but then I saw him holding you, Brandon continued, his voice trembling. And I realized. If he took that money and left, you'd be the one he'd have to get rid of to keep the secret. I couldn't let him do that. He looked at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw the son I remembered. Not the ATM user, but the boy who used to bring me wilted dandelions from the yard. Does this change anything? He asked, a flicker of hope in his eyes. About the trust, about the rent. I looked at the canvas bag of bonds, the elder S treasure that Arthur had hidden to test our family's soul. I realized that while Brandon had saved me tonight, the greed that had led him to that wedding lobby hadn't just vanished. It was a wound that would take years to heal. It changes one thing, I said. Brandon stepped forward, his eyes wide. What? I won't press charges against you for being an accessory tonight, I said, but the rent just went up. And Brandon, you're going to spend your weekends here, helping me repair everything you and your sister broke. The Monday morning after the break-in was a different kind of quiet. The house felt lighter, yet every floorboard seemed to hum with the memory of the struggle. Brandon was gone, sent home with a list of tasks and a legal warning ringing in his ears. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping a cup of Earl Grey, staring at the canvas bag of bearer bonds sitting in the center of the table like a sleeping dragon. What am I going to do with you? I whispered to the bag. Arthur had been more than a CPA, he had been a strategist. He knew that cash alone would never satisfy our children, it would only fuel their fire. The bearer bonds were the elder's treasure, yes, but they were also a trap for the unworthy. If Silas had cashed them, he would have been flagged by the Treasury Department instantly. Arthur had left a trail of breadcrumbs that only a disciplined mind could follow. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an alert from a local community Facebook group. My heart sank as I read the headline: Local grandma suffers mental breakdown at daughter's wedding, family pleads for privacy. Attached to the post was a grainy video, likely filmed by one of Chloe's bridesmaids, of me walking out of the Hilton, looking stern, while Chloe wailed in the background in her wedding dress. The comments were a vitriolic mess. Dementia is so sad, one read. How could she ruin her daughter's big day? Another added. She needs to be in a home before she hurts someone. The gaslighting hadn't stopped. It had simply moved online. Chloe was using the court of public opinion to finish what she couldn't achieve in the court of law. She was trying to social isolate me, to make me so ashamed of my episode that I would retreat into the shadows and give her whatever she wanted just to make the whispering stop. I felt the old familiar sting of shame, the urge to hide. But then I looked at the treasure ledger sitting next to my tea. I looked at the receipts for the $10,000 emergency Chloe claimed she needed for medical bills that actually went toward a European cruise. You want to play in public, Chloe? I said, my voice hardening. Fine, let's go public. I didn't call her. I didn't comment on the post. Instead, I called the local newspaper's investigative reporter, a woman I had known since she was in Girl Scouts. Sarah, it's Evelyn Vance. I have a story for you about the ATM grandma. But it's not the story you've been reading online. I have the bank statements to prove it, and I'm ready to give my first and only interview. The interview took place in my garden, under the shade of the willow Arthur, and I had planted 40 years ago. Sarah, the reporter, sat across from me with a digital recorder and a look of genuine concern. Evelyn, the things being said on social media are intense, Sarah said gently. Your daughter claims you've been showing signs of early-onset Alzheimer's and that you've frozen her out of her own inheritance out of spite. I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. I handed her a folder. Inheritance is something you receive when someone passes, Sarah. What my children have been receiving for the last 15 years is a subsidy. I have spent over $600,000 on emergencies that were actually luxuries. I didn't ruin a wedding, I stopped a heist. I spent the next 2 hours walking her through the ledger. I showed her the loan documents Brandon had signed for startups that never existed. I showed her the emails from Chloe mocking my simple lifestyle while asking for 5-figure wire transfers. But the piece de resistance was the medical report from the neurologist, proving my cognitive health was perfect. This is incredible, Sarah whispered, flipping through the pages. They weren't just taking your money. They were trying to steal your identity as a person. They wanted me to be a ghost so they could play with my shadow, I said. But the story isn't just about me. It's about every elder in this town who is being quietly bled dry by children who think honor thy mother means check her balance. The article ran the following morning. It wasn't a gossip piece. It was a scathing expose on financial elder abuse titled, The Invisible ATM, One Woman's Fight Against the Children She Raised. The reaction was instantaneous. The social media tide turned like a great white on a scent. The people who had been pitying me were now tagging Chloe and Brandon, demanding to know why they were living in houses their mother paid for while calling her crazy. By noon, my front gate was buzzing. I checked the camera. It was Chloe. She wasn't crying this time. She looked like she had just crawled out of a storm. Her hair was a mess and her expensive wedding makeup was smeared. Mom, open this gate. She screamed into the intercom. You've ruined me. My friends are blocking me. The boutique canceled my partnership. You've destroyed my reputation. Your reputation was built on my dime, Chloe, I said through the speaker. It was never real. I don't care about the money anymore. Chloe shrieked, her face pressing against the camera lens. You think you're so smart. Brandon told me about the bearer bonds. He told me what Silas found. If you don't give me my fair share right now, I'm calling the IRS. I'll tell them you've been hoarding untaxed assets for decades. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Chloe was a cornered animal, and cornered animals don't care who they bite. If she called the IRS, she could trigger an audit that would tie up the estate for years. Even if Arthur had paid every cent of tax, the process alone would be a nightmare. The bonds are part of a legal trust, Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They are documented. There is no hoarding. We'll see what the feds think, she yelled. Unless you make this go away, give me 200,000. In cash, right now. And I'll tell everyone the newspaper story was a misunderstanding I coached you to say. I'll fix your image, and we can all go back to normal. Normal, I whispered. Normal was me being a silent bank. Normal was her being a parasite. I looked at the security monitors. Brandon's car pulled up behind hers. He got out, looking conflicted. He saw his sister screaming at the gate and walked over to her, trying to pull her back. Chloe, stop it, Brandon urged. She's already got the confession we signed, you're just making it worse. Get off me, Chloe shoved him. She's got millions in there, Brandon. Millions that should be ours. She's an old woman. She doesn't need it. She's just being greedy now. She's the one being the ATM. She's just out of service. I realized then that no amount of logic, no amount of legal documents, and no amount of tough love would ever change Chloe. She didn't see me as a mother. She saw me as a vault she hadn't found the combination for yet. I'm calling the police, Chloe, I said. You're violating the restraining order from the court. Call them, she laughed hysterically. By the time they get here, the IRS tip line will already have your name at the top of their list. I'm clicking send on the email right now, Mom. I mean it. She held up her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Brandon looked at me through the camera, his eyes pleading for me to just give in, to just pay her to go away so the family could stop bleeding out in public. But I knew the truth. If I paid her now, I'd be paying her forever. Go ahead, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Click it. Chloe's thumb descended, but before she could hit the screen, a black SUV with government plates screeched to a halt behind Brandon's car. Two men in suits stepped out, but they weren't looking at the gate. They were looking at Chloe. Chloe Vance? One of the men asked, his voice echoing in the quiet street. He held up a badge. Internal Revenue Service. Criminal Investigation Division. Chloe froze. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the pavement. I was just about to call you, she stammered, her face turning a ghostly white. My mother, she's the one you want. She has the bonds. We're not here about your mother, the agent said, stepping over her phone. We're here about the boutique LLC you've been running for the last 3 years. The one where you claimed $400,000 in consulting fees paid by your mother's estate as business expenses, while failing to report them as personal income. I stood behind the gate, my jaw dropping. I had known Chloe was using my money, but I hadn't known she was using me as a tax shield for her influencer lifestyle. That was a gift, Chloe cried. Moms give their daughters money all the time. Not when the daughter issues a fraudulent invoice for marketing services to her mother's private trust to bypass gift taxes, the agent replied. That's tax evasion and wire fraud. We've been monitoring the account since your mother flagged the unauthorized access last Friday. I looked at the monitor, stunned. I hadn't flagged her boutique. I had only flagged the wedding account. But in doing so, I had inadvertently tripped a wire I didn't even know existed. The bank's fraud department must have traced the history of the transfers. Brandon backed away from his sister as if she were on fire. Chloe. You were invoicing Mom. I thought you were just asking for it. Shut up, Brandon, Chloe screamed, her voice cracking. You were doing it too, the tech startup. You claimed those were research grants. The second agent looked at Brandon. Mr. Vance, don't go anywhere. We have a few questions about your research as well. I watched as my children were led toward the black SUV. They weren't being arrested yet, but they were being taken in for questioning. The ATM hadn't just run out of cash, it had turned into a witness for the prosecution. As the SUV drove away, the street fell into a sudden, eerie silence. I was alone. I walked back into the house and sat in the library. The bearer bonds were still in the bag. The elder's treasure was still safe. But the house felt too big. The silence was too loud. I reached for the phone to call Clara, but a new notification popped up on my screen. It was a message from a private investigator I had hired months ago. Evelyn, I found the third account Arthur mentioned. It's not in your name, and it's not in the kids' names. It's in a name you're not going to believe. My fingers trembled as I tapped the attachment. I expected to see Silas's name, or perhaps a secret mistress Arthur had kept hidden. My heart was prepared for one final betrayal. Instead, the name at the top of the account was Leo Arthur Vance, my grandson, Chloe's 7-year-old son. The account wasn't a standard savings account. It was a managed investment portfolio, and it was staggering. Arthur hadn't just left me the house and the bonds. He had quietly siphoned a portion of our wealth into a protected trust for the next generation, completely bypassing the middlemen, our children. The investigator's note continued. Arthur set this up 10 years ago. The trigger for the account to be revealed wasn't a date. It was a vulnerability check. The funds were only to be disclosed if the primary estate, your house and savings, came under legal or physical threat from the second generation. Arthur had predicted this. He had known that Brandon and Chloe would try to devour the legacy, so he had hidden the true treasure in the one place they would never think to look, their own children's future. But there was a catch. The account required 2 signatures to be accessed for the grandchildren's needs, mine and a guardian of integrity. I looked at the list of pre-approved guardians Arthur had selected. I expected to see lawyers or bankers. Instead, the list was short. Any member of the second generation who chooses the parent over the prize. I thought about Brandon tackling Silas in the mudroom. I thought about the look of genuine horror on his face when he saw his uncle hurting me. He had chosen me, not perfectly, but in the moment that mattered, he had chosen his mother over the bonds. But Chloe had chosen the IRS tip line. She had chosen the $200,000 bribe. She had chosen the fire. I looked out the window at the garden. I realized that my work wasn't done. I had spent years giving to my children, but I hadn't been teaching them. I had been their enabler, not their elder. If I wanted to save my grandchildren, I couldn't just sit in this house and be a victim. I had to become the architect of a new family, one where love wasn't a transaction. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer. Marcus. I need to make an amendment to the trust, and I need to arrange a visit to the detention center. I have a deal for my son, and a final lesson for my daughter. As I waited for Marcus to pick up, a shadow passed by the library window. I froze. The security guards were supposed to be at the gate. I looked at the monitor, but the screen was nothing but static. Someone had cut the feed. The static on the security monitor felt like a swarm of angry hornets. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized the protection I'd paid so dearly for had been neutralized. I didn't reach for my phone. I knew the lines would be dead. I didn't scream. There was no one left to hear me. Instead, I reached into the treasure ledger and pulled out a small, heavy brass key Arthur had taped to the back cover years ago. It was for the gun safe in the library, the one that held the old Remington he'd taught me to use when we first moved to the woods. But as I turned toward the safe, the library door didn't burst open. It slid. A figure stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. Not a stranger, not Silas, but Sarah, Brandon's wife. She looked different. The suburban princess mask had been discarded, replaced by a cold, sharp desperation. She wasn't holding a weapon, but she was holding something much more dangerous. A legal folder from the state's Department of Child Services. "They're taking my children, Evelyn," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking like dry glass. "Because of your little expose and the IRS raid, they opened an investigation into our unstable home environment. They think because we were financially predatory toward you, we're unfit to have Leo and Sarah." I lowered my hand from the safe, my heart aching at the mention of the grandchildren. "I didn't call CPS, Sarah. I only defended myself." "It doesn't matter who called," Sarah hissed, stepping into the light. "The result is the same. They're in a foster intake center right now. Our bank accounts are frozen, Brandon is being interrogated, and Chloe is likely going to prison. You won. You're the big, powerful matriarch in your big, empty house. Are you happy now?" I looked at the woman who had helped my son try to pack up my life just days ago. "I'm not happy, Sarah. I'm heartbroken. But you can't blame the mirror for showing you the reflection you created." "I don't care about the philosophy," Sarah screamed, lunging toward the desk where the bearer bonds sat in the canvas bag. "I'm taking these. I'm taking the kids and I'm leaving the state. You're going to tell the police I was never here, and you're going to give me the code to the hidden account the investigator found. If you don't, I'll tell the social worker that you've been physically abusive to the kids. I've already got the evidence staged, Evelyn. A few bruises on Leo's arm from when I helped him earlier. I looked at the canvas bag, then at Sarah's eyes. You think you can outrun the truth, Sarah? Look behind you. The library door creaked open, and a shadow fell across the floor. The shadow belonged to Brandon. He stood in the doorway, his face bruised from the encounter with Sela's, his clothes rumpled and smelling of the police station. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his wife, who was clutching the canvas bag of bonds like a life raft. You did what to Leo's arm, Sarah. Brandon's voice was a low, dangerous rumble I had never heard from him before. Sarah spun around, her face pale. Brandon, thank God, we can go. I've got the bonds. We can get the kids and just disappear. Your mother is going to cooperate, aren't you, Evelyn? Brandon didn't move toward the money. He walked toward his wife, his eyes fixed on her hands. I just spent 4 hours at the precinct, Sarah. I told them everything. I told them about Sela's, about the loans, about the way we treated Mom. I was trying to make it right, so we could get the kids back. You did what? Sarah shrieked. You confessed, you idiot, we're ruined. No, Brandon said, his voice trembling with a strange new clarity. We were ruined a long time ago. We were ruined every time we looked at Mom and saw a dollar sign instead of a person. But I draw the line at my kids. You hurt Leo to frame my mother, the woman who paid for your engagement ring. The woman who never missed a single one of our birthdays, even when we forgot hers. Sarah backed away, her eyes darting toward the window. I did it for us, Brandon, to keep us together. You did it for the lifestyle, Brandon countered. He turned to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son truly ashamed. Mom, I called the social worker from the station. I told her the truth about the investigation. They're bringing the kids here. They said this is the only safe place for them right now. I felt a surge of relief so powerful it made my knees weak. They're coming here. Only if you'll have them, Brandon said. I'm going back to the station. I have to finish the deposition. I might face charges for the wire fraud, but I don't care anymore. Just, don't let her take the bag, Mom, and don't let her near my kids. Sarah realized the walls were finally closing in. She dropped the bag and made a break for the mudroom, but Brandon stepped into her path. Just as Brandon reached for her arm, the sound of a siren wailed in the distance, getting closer. But it wasn't the police. It was an ambulance. And it was turning into my driveway. The ambulance wasn't for me. It was for Chloe. She had been released from questioning but had collapsed in the parking lot, a combination of a panic attack and what the doctors later called a cardiovascular event. The princess had finally broken under the weight of her own crumbling empire. I stood on the porch with Brandon as the paramedics wheeled Chloe into the house. She had begged to be taken to Mom's house because she had nowhere else to go. Her own home had been seized by the trust earlier that afternoon. She looked small, pale, and terrified, stripped of her designer clothes and her arrogance. Mom, she wheezed as they moved her into the guest room. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I just wanted to be someone. I sat by her bed, holding her hand. The anger was still there, but it was being overshadowed by a profound sense of duty. Not the duty of a giver, but the duty of a matriarch. You were always someone, Chloe. You just didn't like the person you were, so you tried to buy a new one with my life savings. Behind me, the front door opened, and a social worker walked in, holding the hands of Leo and Sarah Jr. The children looked terrified, their eyes wide as they saw the chaos of the house. Leo's arm was bandaged where Sarah had marked him. Grandma, Leo cried, breaking free and sprinting toward me. He buried his face in my lap, sobbing. They said we couldn't come home, they said you were sick. I'm not sick, Leo, I whispered, stroking his hair. I'm just reorganizing. I looked at the social worker. They stay here. Permanently if necessary. I have the resources, the space, and the legal standing. My daughter is ill, my son is cooperating with the authorities, and my daughter-in-law is no longer welcome on this property. The social worker nodded. Based on Mr. Vance's testimony and the medical reports, Mrs. Vance, you are the only stable element in this family's equation. I looked around the room. My children were broken. My grandchildren were traumatized. The ATM was empty, but the house was full. I realized that the treasure of the elder wasn't the bonds or the secret account. It was the power to rebuild from the ashes. But as I began to settle the children, a dark thought occurred to me. Silas was still out there. He had posted bail an hour ago, and he knew about the bearer bonds. I looked at the canvas bag sitting on the kitchen counter. I had forgotten to lock it away in the chaos. I turned to grab it, but the counter was empty. The bag and the $3 million in bonds was gone. The kitchen window was ajar, the sheer curtain fluttering in the night breeze. My heart stopped. I hadn't seen anyone enter, but Silas was a shadow, a man who lived in the gaps of other people's lives. "Brandon," I shouted. "The bonds, Silas has them." Brandon ran into the kitchen, his face hardening. "He can't have gone far. He doesn't have a car, the police impounded his." We ran to the porch. The night was dark, but the headlights of the ambulance still illuminated the driveway. In the distance, near the edge of the woods that bordered my property, I saw a flash of silver. Silas was running toward the old creek bed, the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "Let him go, Mom," Brandon said, catching his breath. "It's just money. Let him take it and leave us alone." "It's not just money, Brandon," I said, my voice firm. "It's Leo's college. It's Sarah's future. It's the only thing that will ensure this family isn't dependent on me until I die. It's their independence." I didn't wait for Brandon. I grabbed the heavy industrial flashlight from the porch and headed for the woods. I knew these trails better than Silas ever would. I'd walked them every morning for 30 years. I knew where the ground turned to soft mud and where the old well was hidden under the overgrowth. "Silas," I shouted into the dark, "you can't cash them, they're flagged." "I don't need to cash them all." His voice drifted back, jagged and panicked. "I just need enough for a plane ticket. You owe me, Evelyn. Arthur owed me." I saw him trip near the creek. The canvas bag flew from his hand, sliding toward the edge of the ravine. Silas scrambled after it, his fingers clawing at the wet earth. But as he reached for the strap, the ground beneath him gave way. He let out a sharp, terrified yelp as he slid down the steep embankment, landing hard in the freezing, shallow water of the creek. He wasn't seriously hurt, but he was pinned under a fallen log, the canvas bag just out of his reach. I stood at the top of the ridge, my flashlight beam pinning him like a moth. "Help me," Silas pleaded, his teeth chattering. "Evelyn, please, my leg, I think it's broken." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number, but it wasn't the police. "Marcus, I'm at the creek. I need you to witness a verbal amendment to the trust. Right now." "The amendment is simple, Marcus," I said, my voice echoing over the sound of the rushing creek. "The bearer bonds are to be turned over to the state's Victim Restitution Fund. Every cent. I don't want them in this house. I don't want them in my name. Let them be used to help elders who didn't have a treasure ledger to protect them." Silas let out a moan of despair, as he realized his prize was evaporating into thin air. Brandon reached the ridge behind me panting. He looked at Silas, then at me, then at the bag. He didn't argue, he just nodded. "Help him up, Brandon," I said. "Then call the police. We're done with the shadows." 6 months later, the dust had finally settled. The ATM grandma was no longer a headline. I sat on the deck of a small, beautiful villa overlooking the coast of Portugal. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in 40 years, I wasn't listening for the sound of someone asking for a loan. The house back home had been sold. The proceeds, along with the secret account Arthur had left for Leo, were safely locked in a trust that no one could touch for personal use. It was a legacy of education and stability, not a slush fund for greed. Brandon was working a steady job in construction, paying off his legal fines, and attending court-mandated counseling. He called me once a week, not to ask for money, but to tell me about Leo's soccer games. We were building a relationship on the one thing we'd never had: honesty. Chloe was in a residential treatment center, learning how to define herself without a price tag. It would be a long road, but she was finally starting to breathe on her own. As for me, I had learned the treasure of the elder. The greatest gift you can give the people you love isn't a full bank account, it's a set of boundaries. I had spent my life buying their affection because I was afraid of their absence. But in cutting them off, I had actually set us all free. I took a sip of my wine.